This is IBM Museum, and this has been a big ordeal. People remember from the prior video of me going through and talking about running the system information tool on this little 9533 beauty. That's the PS2 Model 33. And as part of the prep for the video, I'd gone through and I'd booted the machine and it didn't give me any configuration errors. I was certain it had a good battery, but when I used the diskette that I was for the system information tool to load that on the system, it just hated the diskette. And so I thought, well, I'll go through and I'll bring the other two systems I have. And that way, the law of averages, I would have a working diskette drive in them. And one of them was an identical unit that had the PCMCI slots as well. I did go through and choose a third one that I had that has just a single network adapter, and that's one of those Intel 816s. It works in an 8-bit slot or works in a 16-bit slot. And I wanted to have that machine and not have to pull out the PCMCA adapter and things like that in the video. So I chose to have that one, have it open. And of course I found it needed to run the configuration. So I put a new battery in it. And it still hated that diskette that I had the system information tool on. So probably a bad diskette. I went through and I knew the system worked from diskette because I ran through the star diskette to configure it. So I copied over SIT onto that diskette and loaded it on the hard drive and went through for the recording yesterday and did the full recording session. I go through and I do a mic check before I start. Do just a testing and make sure that I'm audible, and the test passed. And as I went through to sit down to start the video, that static electricity, and I've had where it's temporarily disabled my microphone recently when that happens. And so, and it's a wired headset. It does go through. It's one of the MPOW. It's seems to be a relatively good brand, but it goes through a USB connection as well. Detachable headset with the regular plug, and they've got a USB adapter where you can mute for the cough button and adjust the volume on the speakers and things like that. And I just went through and proceeded on my video. I didn't really look at the audio levels, and I was rushed after the video and went to immediately put it up without listening, going through and proofing it. And that's something that I am in the habit of doing as well. When is the first time that I didn't do that? Guess. Yesterday. And thankfully a quick, I'd say viewer, but a listener didn't hear anything and quickly got back to me and said, hey, there's just no audio. So I unlisted the video and thought that I would go through and re-record it today. I went through and I've now figured out that static seems to have damaged the wired headset microphone. The speakers still work. I still got feedback with that. Apparently the USB portion works as well. It's just the microphone for some reason that static charge, and with me being grounded as it were in that static electricity when I sit down, that's the path to ground, and apparently damaged it some way in there. I went through and just tried to work with it, get it working again. and it didn't. And I had a standalone microphone up here, and I would have preferred to use that, but I plugged that in, and I could not get any sort of on my system to recognize. It would recognize the microphone would be plugged in, but I've got just being a straight microphone. Most of the stuff now is used to headsets. The Sound Blaster device that's on this system didn't recognize that microphone input. It kept telling me it was disconnected. So I went home and got my wireless headset. And this is a from Logitech, or I don't know if they call themselves Logi now, Logi. Um, I had one of these for headsets for years, and actually had a blue outside, and I would go through and even play music when I was in the office, and I could step outside, and I could be more than 100 feet away, and I would actually still get outside the building, still get audio from my system. Great wireless link. And I eventually had to where one of the earpieces went out in volume. It didn't play anymore. I didn't delve inside to see if there was and that's what I should do. I mean, I've got that old set somewhere. I just went out and what's the modern consumer? Well, let's just buy another one. I bought this one, and I've been it works short distances, but I'm amazed. I can be right next to the computer, and I will actually have um, static. I'll have the sound drop out, even moving 5 or 10 feet away. So the quality there, and I don't know if it's just the wireless link. I thought about using the old USB dongle in there to see if it would work with the new one to maybe clear it up. But I don't know. That's just the quality. So if we ever talk about quality, but let's get back to the point where I finally got the system information tool loaded to a system. Let's go ahead and actually let's power it up. And I do have the system information tool loaded on the hard drive for that now. Hopefully, okay. We get a memory count. Nothing else weird is going to gonna happen to delay me re-recording this. And so after a good long lead-in and recording time, we finally get back on the topic. Maybe it's going back to a little bit of the warts and all. And I think that the sound characteristics of this headset are a little bit different too, and we might pick up a little bit more ambient noise than was before. It might sound a little bit different. And that's probably just the quality of the headset as well. And I need to just get a new headset again. So we're to the DOS prompt, and I did see that starting PC DOS. And there is, I don't know what the system was used for. I don't know when I acquired it. With that single network card in there, it may actually have may have been like a network terminal or something like that, maybe, or I don't think that I worked with the system at all to go through and modify it from the way I received it. But let's go ahead and let's I know from recording the other day, I don't have any real surprises now. I've figured out some surprises on that video. Let's go through before we. I know that we have a mouse driver on this system, and let's go through and load that before we run the system information tool. And then let's go ahead and start up SIT. And I do have the mouse right in front of me, and I mean I've shown what that mouse pointer does before, but maybe that's kind of a handy thing to have now. And so let's get started. Okay, and system information tool, we're on the adapter information. as we understand, the display adapter information does not work on this ISA bus, MUL 33. Everything below a MUL PS2 MUL 50 on the PS2 line is, whether it's a 8500 series or a 9500 series, it's a other than microchannel bus. And these PS2Es are really, really nice that they have that that PCMCIA adapter I have on 2 of the units, and so it takes that single ISA slot and puts it over and makes it into 4 PCMCIA connections front and back. And later on, when we look at the unit internally, and I'll show how to open the unit, change the battery, what that PCMCIA adapter assembly looks like. And so the volume label of IBM 6-3 maybe relating to the DOS version, and it's only 120 megabyte disk. And those are the smaller, or viewed as the laptop size, 2.5-inch IDE, parallel IDE drives. And just like any other PS2, the MUL 33 has no long block addressing support. So you're limited up to about 512 megabyte or whatever, give or take. I don't know what the actual number is in there, but and some people get around that by loading the software, like a disk manager that goes through and adds that translation, but the software gets messed up or corrupted, and you've lost your information. I preferred the hardware method. I'll go through and I can actually check at some point to make sure. And I didn't know what this boot manager partition is, and that may be something relating to that. And I'll just have to look at it a little bit deeper. I don't know why really to run a boot manager on something that's a disk that's below that 512 megabyte anyway. And then the diskette drives, and this is what I was really worried about when I had that diskette with the system information tool fail originally. They only have 3 of these units. It's got a fairly unique diskette drive that attaches to the system planer, and I needed a functional one for the easy way to get the system information tool over to it. And IBM's version is the only one that I've put over. I haven't transferred any of the ones that I've been working on. And okay, so keyboard information, 101, 102, and 122 key keyboards are supported. So that 122 key keyboard is that host connect. We may even get to looking at those a little bit later on. That's kind of from the mainframe side, or it's people have adapted those to PCs and everything. But that was a fairly unique IBM terminal keyboard at that time. Keyboard ID 41AB, which is the pretty standard keyboard ID for the 101, 102 key keyboard. Get typomatic rate supported and set typomatic rate supported. Return to default typomatic rates supported. Get the mouse pointer out of the way here. Memory information. Memory hardware. System board memory modules installed. This system is not supported. So it doesn't give us any more information about what particular SIMs are in there. And then I know from the unit being open, we've got a single 8 megabyte SIM that's in there. Mapping. And of course, with just DOS on there right now, that's the okay. Miscellaneous technical information, maybe a little bit more detail there. Second interrupt chip is present. Real-time clock is present. Wait on external event is unsupported. Extended BIOS data area is allocated. System has a 8T bus. I don't know if I'll correct the grammar in that with my example later on to say an AT bus, or I typically refer to it as the system has an ISA bus, industry standard architecture, for that 16-bit, and then refer to the 8-bit as just an XT bus. DMA supports 24-bit address space, and that's what we have available on this CPU. 16 megabyte maximum of RAM. Keyboard functionality call supported. Return POS data call is unsupported. Return memory map call is unsupported. Enable disable processor functions call supported. And that's because of the 46 SLC2 CPU that's in there. The cache is the knowable thing that can be enabled or disabled. And 8042 keyboard controller in system. Data streaming is unsupported. SCSI subsystem not present on the system board. Information panel is not installed. This is not an IML system. SCSI support is not in the IML image. That's IML's initial machine load. Okay, mouse information. Mouse is present, PS2 type, and the driver version number 8.32. It looked like on the copyrights that both Microsoft and IBM, and this is PC-DOS. As we find out here, PC-DOS version 6.3. Okay. Mullen processor, and this is one of the surprises I found with the recording the video yesterday. And I'm sorry I can't be surprised here because I've already seen this when I recorded that episode. But machine name IBM PS2 Mul 35/40. And this is not a Mul 35/40. This is a Mul 33. And it was interesting to me because the planar, and again, those, and I don't think I've really shown those. I need to run the system information tool on them as well, see if they're identified identical. But the Mul 35SX and Mul 40SX shared a system planar, and it was, of course, an ISA Mul 386 20 megahertz. And it doesn't have any CPU upgrade socket like we saw on the Mul 56. They do share that same case style as Mul 56 for the 35SX, and the Mul 40SX has that larger case that is almost exactly the PS2 Mul 57. But the systems weren't expandable in that. There's a little bit of history on them as well, that they misplaced a unit that was going to be called the 30SX, PS2 Mul 30SX, and made IBM kind of decide to suppress that 30SX Mul and release the 35 and 40 being more capable systems. And then there was some very rare systems out there of the Mul 35 and 40, and that is the 9500 series for that Mul 35 and 40, 9535 and 9540 that actually use the PS2 33 planar, the same one that's in there, and we'll look a little bit more detail inside that in some other video when looking at the interior of that unit. But those Muls are extremely rare. I mean, I've seen the the label for one. I've heard of maybe at most of two actually existing. The one I saw the mall submall label for was a mall 35 9535, and that is why I wanted to run this unit that didn't have the PCMCIA adapter on it. It only had that single the NIC and the single ISA slot because I thought it'd be interesting to go through and plug in the. I'm sorry, we get a little bit too much. I can maybe use the glare to my advantage. That's the riser for the 35SX, and this is the riser for the 40SX ISA slots, and it's of course the interface to the system planar is the same, but these will work in that mall 33. I thought about going through and when having the system open, removing just that single ISA card because with DOS, with us loading nothing else, it's easy to swap risers. And I'll probably cover over that. I'll go through and do that exercise with the when I show the interior of the system, just to show that the slots physically plug in. And really, in the cases where like a microchannel system with risers, the riser changes that planar ID because the system has to know how many microchannel slots it is, with them being enumerated. And so if you have a 3-slot riser or a 5-slot riser, microchannel adapters, the system has to be aware of which riser is present. So it changes that planar ID relevant, just like I pointed out in the video about the mall 56 and 57. And between the 8500 series and the 9500 series, they shared the same risers between them all the the 8556 and 9556 have that same shared riser, and the 8557 and 9557 malls share that mall 57 riser, and they change. Each one has its at the 8500 level and the 9500 level has a different planar ID. But that planar ID changes between the mall 56 and mall 57 in that instance. So it's curious. We saw the planar ID, and that's not normally on an ISA unit. But we saw that on the model 3286. I went through and I saw a planar ID finally, and I was a little bit disappointed that it didn't change when I pulled the riser entirely out of there or had a riser for a mall 25 286. But it got me curious and thinking about this instance of those rare machines and what it would be with the riser plugged in. Now, in the system information tool that we've run previously, it's shown that planar ID, and I don't see that data here at all. And I think they showed it at the bottom. They just called it the system board ID or pause ID, and that is suppressed. It's not listed here, and that's the first time I've not seen it there when it is even the other ISA malls. I mean, we saw when they give it and they still have that FFFF for meaning it's an invalid planar ID, but it still displays it. In this instance, it's not displayed. And I'll show, since I was so curious about that planar ID, I'll show you once we exit the system information tool on what I did to kind of still look at that detail, what I found out. Now, moving on, getting back on the topic, the processor is listed here as an 80486 SLC2. And that just sounds like confusion to me. I think whoever wrote the system information tool whether it was an IBM employer or whether it was actually programmed in-house, um, is I've never seen that 80 leading the CPU numeric identifier like an 80386 or 80486, with the exception of the Intel processors. And so I think whoever wrote this was a little bit confused, and they put that 80 on the front of it for some reason. But it's an IBM 486 SLC2. I've never seen it otherwise with that 80 prefacing the that listing. And those are the reasons, like I say, the model being identified wrong here is a 35/40 instead of a 33, and the CPU, the way that that's identified. That's why I write those revisions or work on my versions of tools, utilities like the system system information tool to correct those. And my program is going to show those correctly. And PS2s are no longer a moving target, so that will be easy to do. There's a finite number of mols to them, and I can determine which model it is, and fairly easily. It does get the speed listed there correctly. It's 25 megahertz on the planar, that 50 megahertz on the because it's clock doubled internally on that CPU. Coprocessor is none. Um, internal cache is disabled, and that is piques my curiosity a little as well of why the internal cache is disabled. Because normally once it is booted up and running, and I may have to look through on the star diskette to find out that's just disabled by default, or something else quirky is going on, or whether even the SIT program may be going through and just misidentifying that value of checking to see if that internal cache, which normally should be enabled, the processor goes through and checks that at boot up, and if it's functional and there's no other reason, and there is functionality to go through and disable it. And that other thing is that that CPU functionality call. I mean, going through, I wouldn't think that they would be disabling it with the checking that aspect. They're not really necessarily checking if the cache is enabled, just if the function call is supported, which they can do through that BIOS get configuration information to make sure that the bit is set that supports that function call. Model F8, and again we see that 386SX and above. IBM defined the BIOS model of those as it's just a generic F8, and there's many models of that. Submodel 24, and I have to see if that relates to the 33 in particular, or if that is maybe the part of the confusion, and see what the model 35 and 40 say for that. The BIOS revision is 02, and the BIOS ROM date of March 31st, 1993 in that convention. And that's fairly late in the date game as far as IBM PS2s are concerned. But no planar ID listed on that screen, and that kind of amazed me in a way. Parallel and serial port information, as we learned, it just identifies how many of those ports are on the system. SCSI information, of course, SCSI is not present. And video information. And this is an XGA2 chipset that's in the Model 33. And that should tell that should be detectable by the system information tool as well, because XGA and XGA2, I mean, IBM didn't do any ISA adapters for that. They didn't put that on any other systems that were based on the ISA bus, with the exception of the Model 33 and then those rare 35 and 40 models that use the same planar. Um, but that's the video information. So that's all of what is to the system information tool. Brought us back to the DOS prompt. And I thought, well, I know the routine to, I mean, I have that on my website as it is, and I'll link that in there to how to get the planar ID from BASIC or ROM BASIC. And I thought here, and I just lost my head for a bit when I went through the other video and I did BASIC, and I realized that PC-DOS 6.3, didn't have BASIC all of a sudden. And so I went through and went looking at the only directory here otherwise that was on the system. There's not really much else on the hard drive, and this is about the only directory with files. But I went through and just tried to figure out what level it was at, well, what tools I would have. And I saw the edit.com, and I realized pretty quickly that that's the full screen editor that also is shared with the QBasic program. QBasic being the stripped down version of the Microsoft Quick Basic. And that was a pretty good programming abilities there. And that was what preceded the Visual Basic for DOS. I do have some Quick Basic 4.5, things like that around. But so I knew we'd probably have QBasic, and it's shown there at the top of this page of information. And then at the very bottom, I also saw the Edlin line editor there, and that was the one I was thinking would be present more with the PC-DOS. So, I mean, that was there are people out there that really liked using that Edlin single line editor, not a full screen. And then so I knew that I had that QBasic, so I went in and actually did the planar ID program, and I saved that away. And at least I saved it so you don't have to wouldn't have to sit through my typing. You have to sit through my talking, but you didn't have to sit through my typing. I'm a two-finger typist. You break two fingers and you'd ruin my ability to type. And with QBasic, you don't have to have the line numbers like you do on BASIC. But that's the code, and like I say, that's exactly as it is on my website. And with BASIC, normally ROM BASIC, it's not case sensitive. It normally goes through and capitalizes all your variables. With QBasic and Quick Basic, I think you can get in trouble if you have, because it capitalization, if you're referring to the wrong variable, having that mixed uppercase or lowercase letter from what the reference is, then it won't do it. But so that's the code. I'll link that in the description. Let's go through and run that. And it goes back to that executing the program and just shows the 0 there. And then pressing key to continue to get back into the QBasic environment. And so I sat there and kind of hemmed and hawed on that too. And showing 0 is kind of odd in a way, I think, too, because normally it would be an invalid planar ID and just show up as FFFF. And it looks like the system here resets that to, or doesn't have that value stored away in that extended CMOS area, that it goes through and just, identifies, just has a 0, and that's probably what makes SIT not display that planar ID, is it sees that 0, and that's kind of a flag to the system. I wanted to do I'm wondering, I don't know if I necessarily want to delay the presentation here on the 33. I thought about going through another extended BIOS area and seeing what it says for the CPU, but it's probably got those values because those are displayed in the system information tool. So um, that looks like it's a wrap. I mean, for all the trouble of me going through and to get the video done, I finally did record it. I'm relatively sure I got sound. I'll go through and check this before I post it this time. Thank you to that viewer, that listener that got back to me and gave me the heads up. And I'll go through and get this video up. And if you do enjoy this sort of content, warts and all, and hearing me just ramble on, please click on that like button and please subscribe to my channel for a lot more content. We're going to start looking inside the Model 33 as well, and there's a lot more other content to go through as well. So, but that's all I have for now. This is IBM Museum. Thank you.